In February 1965, the Alaska Railroad announced that Alaska's last steam locomotive, Engine 557, was to be sold to a scrap metal dealer in the lower 48, while her sister, Engine 556, was donated to the city of Anchorage and placed on the park strip for display. Engine 557 was to be dismantled and sent to the scrap line. This was the end of Alaska's steam era, and it was an indignant death sentence for the last steamer that so faithfully served our Alaska pioneers. 557's story begins during World War II. Few Americans are aware the Japanese Imperial Navy actually bombed and strafed U.S. soil in two locations, Pearl Harbor and Fort Mears at Dutch Harbor, Alaska. The Japanese went on to occupy the American islands of Attu and Kiska. Military leaders recognized Alaska's strategic importance, vulnerability, and that the Alaska Railroad was critical transportation infrastructure. Obtained through military channels, 6 S-160 locomotives arrived in Alaska during 1943. 3 more, including 557, arrived on the SS Crowley Victory ship in November of 1944. They were unloaded at the new Port of Whittier onto the Alaska Railroad dock. These 9 locomotives moved troops and military cargo from Whittier and to and between bases in Anchorage and Fairbanks. In a unique arrangement, the railroad was supplemented with soldiers assigned to the Army's 714th Railway Operating Battalion. The 550-class steam locomotives apparently proved their worth, as the Alaska Railroad obtained 3 more as war surplus. All 12 were first-line motive power for the Alaska Railroad after the war ended. This steam fleet served Alaska into the early 1950s. As newer diesel locomotives arrived, the steamers were placed into standby service, retired, and then scrapped. However, Engine 557 was retained for special passenger excursions and made her last revenue run September 5, 1959, to the first Alaska State Fair. Held in strategic reserve, she saw service again in 1962 during high water when torrential rains flooded the Tanana River and the rail yard at Nenana. The diesel-electric locomotives of that day could not operate during flooding. 557 provided shuttle service through the high water, which at times reached her firebox. The diesel engines waited on high ground on both ends of the flooded area as Engine 557 chugged back and forth, moving passengers and cargo. Her end was inevitable when the Alco diesel engines had their electric traction motors waterproofed. Engine 557 stood idle in the Whittier engine house from 1962 until that fateful day in 1965, when the Alaska Railroad decided to sell her for scrap and shipped her south on the train ship Alaska. If this legend were to live, she herself would have to be rescued. Then the Engine 557 story came to the attention of Monty Holmes, who at 13 years old had left home and become a hobo. During the Depression, he rode the rails from state to state looking for work. His affection for steam locomotives endured, and he vowed to own his own railroad someday. Monty rescued Engine 557 by purchasing her from the scrap line in Everett, Washington. He placed her in his House of Poverty Museum at Moses Lake, Washington, and for the next 45 years, 557 was showcased as a prized possession. Following Monty's death, family friends returned the locomotive to Alaska with the condition that she be restored and again do the job she was intended for, hauling passengers on the Alaska Railroad. In January 2012, Engine 557 returned to Whittier with much fanfare and was moved by a special train to a festive greeting at the historic Anchorage Depot. In a special movement by truck, the 168,000-pound locomotive was moved to the Wasilla Engine House. At that time, the engine house was an empty warehouse. It has since been transformed into a facility well equipped to perform the restoration and worthy of the name 557 Engine House. The volunteer mechanical crews started the overhaul immediately. As of July 2017, the crew had logged more than 50,000 hours. The locomotive was disassembled and a comprehensive assessment conducted. Parts were removed, cleaned, marked, and cataloged. Rehabilitation of worn parts began as the reassembly process started. Thousands of ultrasound thickness tests were made and all internal surfaces were cleaned of old paint and rust. Engine 557 is being assembled with attention to detail and pride in the finished product. The overhaul will return her to better than new condition with many upgrades in technology and safety. She will proudly represent the 2,120 S-160 locomotives built by Baldwin, Alco, and Lima for the U.S. Army Transportation Corps in support of Allied forces in World War II. When 557 returns to operation, she will give both riders and train chasers an unforgettable railroad experience. Alaskans, as well as national and international visitors, will be able to see, smell, hear, touch, and feel this living piece of Alaska history. As an historic treasure, Engine 557 is the real deal. Donations are a vital part of this project. While various grants support the restoration, individual donations are very important for matching grants and continuing this work. You have the opportunity to participate in this magnificent restoration. Like the wheels of the train rolling down the track, individual donations keep this project steaming along. Consider writing a generous check to the Engine 557 Restoration Company to help memorialize Engine 557 as a U.S. Army veteran and bring her back to service.